After the 1893 overthrow of the Hawaiian government, with which all of you are familiar, a mythology was propagated with which all of you are familiar, holding that America's takeover of the Hawaiian Islands resulted from 13 freedom-loving Americans in Honolulu who objected to a tyrannical monarchy. The familiar story, right? That the Hawaiian people had gone along with this takeover, even welcomed it, and for good measure that Hawaii had been saved from the evil designs of the Japanese immigrant plantation workers. Furthermore, all of this was made legal by a treaty of annexation between the country called Hawaii and the United States, right? Today I want to set the scene as it actually existed in 1897, after a draft treaty of annexation had been thwarted in the U.S. Congress for a second time, mainly because of Native Hawaiian opposition. And then I want to move on to examine the events of 1898, which I think frame what the event that we're experiencing today, which is the 50th anniversary of Hawaii's statehood. Having survived the brutal cold of Hawaii's winter, the Hawaiian delegation welcomed spring. Having survived yet another campaign to annex their homeland to America, they took a brief moment to remark cheerfully on the survival of Hawaii as an independent nation. Perhaps the moment for America to take over Hawaii had come and gone in 1897, and perhaps the Hawaiians could now get their country back. The Queen of Hawaii had been living in a hotel in Washington, D.C. during most of 1897, and the delegates of the Native Hawaiian political societies had arrived toward the end of the year in the dead of winter to support her with the most ambitious of their many petitions. The delegation had come from mass rallies in Hawaii against annexation that had been attended by tens of thousands of Hawaiians who now were nearly a quarter of the Earth's surface away from Washington, D.C. At one of the rallies against annexation, a Hawaiian speaker, had likened the kingdom of Hawaii to a house that had been built by Kamehameha the Great. A handful of foreigners had come and taken over the house, and they had given the Hawaiians a lay stand in return, where the Hawaiians were expected to reside and sell flowers. The speaker asked, would the Hawaiians live in the lay stand? A'ole, the crowd had shouted back. No, never. As a result of the petition drive, the Hawaiian delegation had arrived in Washington, D.C. with 38,000 signatures protesting America's proposed annexation of their country. As their petitions said, the native people had not been consulted on the proposed dissolution of their nation, nor was the Republic of Hawaii, its successor, a republic, but rather a tyranny of the many by the few, bolstered by the nearly continuous presence of U.S. warships. To describe the situation in words that America might understand, the Queen of Hawaii was to write that America surely would not want to become a colonizer and a land grabber. If the American government was to follow the British, the French, and Germans into colonialism, was this agreeable to the American people? While no doubt Americans could rival the Europeans in the sad business of conquest, was this how an idealistic nation wanted to be known in the world? Would a nation that originated from an anti-colonial revolution now want to be known for its colonization of others? And in this reading, I now want to fast forward through some events to get us to the exact nature of the takeover because I think in the process of the last years since we observed the anniversary of the overthrow and the anniversary of the annexation, all of us in Hawaii, and I hope to a certain extent people across the United States, have come to know that there was massive Hawaiian resistance to annexation, that indeed Hawaiians did not go along with annexation, that Hawaiians opposed annexation. And in this process I should cite the pioneering work of Dr. Noinoi Silva, the Hawaiian scholar, in uncovering those mass petitions that I ended up having the benefit of writing about and also including in my film, companion film of this book. I'd also fast forward past the oppressive and undemocratic nature of what the Republic of Hawaii purported to be a legitimate government. And I would then like to go to the event that set in motion a renewed drive for annexation, and that was the American naval attack that launched the Spanish-American War of 1898. An aspect that is so far-flung that most people have no idea that this was the clincher in this history. One of the oddities of the Spanish-American War was that Americans thought it was about Cuba, but the fighting began in the Philippines. And between the two, it was the Philippine theater of the war that redirected the history of Hawaii, to say nothing of American history and world history. On May 1, 1898, the American Admiral George Dewey maneuvered the Asiatic fleet past Corregidor and into Manila Bay. At dawn, the American sailors shouted the war cry, "Remember the USS Maine." They fired. Where once Spain had been the greatest naval force in the Pacific, by noon, 11 of its 12 ships had gone down, and the 12th had surrendered. Dewey sent an encoded message to Washington, and the Undersecretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, emerged from the decoding room with the official words, surrounded by reporters. Not one American had died in the battle against the Spanish fleet. Everyone cheered. Theodore Roosevelt had announced that if the war came, he would resign his desk job, go to the field, and fight with the men. McKinley, who was President McKinley, right? President McKinley asked how his wife would feel, perhaps alluding to the fact that Mrs. Roosevelt recently had undergone surgery and nearly died. Roosevelt said this was a case where neither she nor Henry Cabot Lodge, Roosevelt's good pal, would be consulted. She was recovering and faithfully supported his plan to leave her with their 6 children. President McKinley asked Roosevelt to stay on in Washington, but Roosevelt had made up his mind. One of his acquaintances said, "I really think he is going mad." Roosevelt served as the second in command in one of the 26 regiments mobilized to fight the Spanish in Cuba, but it nonetheless became known as Roosevelt's Regiment, a mixture of Ivy League blue bloods, cowboys, and gunslingers, many of whom Roosevelt knew personally. They were men, he was to write, with whom he had ridden the long circle, his allusion to being a cowboy. They were indeed to become known as Rough Riders, and Roosevelt was to fight his way with them up San Juan Hill, which is virtually all any of us, if we're well-informed, know about the Spanish-American War. But what really happened that mattered was in the Pacific. The United States had no plan for what to do in the wake of Dewey's attack on the Spanish.